In this screencast, I'm going to introduce you to the next section of Component 1 by starting to look at a range of different sociological theories. Now, even though we've only been covering Component 1 of A-Level Sociology for just a few weeks, we've already covered a lot of ground. We've explored this key question, what is sociology, by relating it to the sociological imagination, and then we spent quite a bit of time developing a conceptual toolkit, so looking at what I've called the building blocks of sociology, some of the core ideas that we use to make sense of society. In the next section of the course, we're going to start to look at social theory or sociological theory, and in this particular screencast we're really going to focus on two key questions. So the first key question that we're going to focus on in this video is, why is theory so important in sociology? And what you'll find as you go deeper into this course is that these theoretical perspectives that I'm going to introduce in the next section of the course are vitally important for sociology. Once you've understood these theories, you can apply them to most of the topics that we're going to be looking at later on in the course. So that's the first question, why is theory so important? The second key question that we're going to explore in this introductory screencast is, what are the main ways in which we categorize the range of theories that you will come across in a sociology course. Now, good sociology, I think, has to have two key ingredients. On the one hand, it's got to be based on research, and of course in your research methods lesson we've started to look at some of the main research methods that sociologists use to gather data. And then the other key ingredient of good sociology is theory. Okay? And theories are simply ideas about how things work. So a sociological theory is simply a set of ideas about how society works. And there's a two-way relationship between theory and research. On the one hand, research often forms the basis of social theory. So sociologists will collect data about the social world, and then on the basis of the data that they've collected, they then formulate theories in order to explain the phenomena, the patterns that they find within their data. For example, a sociologist interested in educational attainment might gather data that seems to suggest that children from working class backgrounds, so children from poorer backgrounds, are more likely to underachieve in school. On the basis of that data, they will then develop a range of theoretical explanations to try to explain why this link actually occurs. So they might conclude that it's down to poverty or material deprivation, to use the jargon. They might conclude that it's down to the way in which children are socialized, or cultural deprivation, to use the jargon. Or they might conclude that it's down to the attitudes and prejudices and labels that teachers assign to children from a working class background. But this relationship between research and theory is sometimes the other way around. So it's often the case that it's theory that comes first, and it's theory that informs the research process. So once sociologists establish a theory, they then might want to conduct research in order to explore it further, or to see whether or not it can be proved wrong. For example, there's a theory in political sociology known as the iron law of oligarchy. And what this theory states is that there's an inevitable tendency in all political systems for a small group of leaders to gain control and to use their power in their own interests rather than the public's interests. Now, researchers might want to explore this theory by firstly finding evidence that seems to support this explanation of power within political systems, but to really test this theory, they would also probably want to see if they could find exceptions, see if they could find examples of political systems where this iron law of oligarchy is not the case. So theory and research are the two ingredients that make up good sociology, and sociology is a weaker subject if we lose either of these two ingredients. For example, the danger of doing research without theory is you just end up with a description of the social world. You need theory to interpret, to analyse, to make sense of the research data. But if we just sit back in our armchairs and theorise about the social world, this is also problematic, because theory without research is just opinion. It makes sociology into quite a subjective subject. We need always to try out our theories, to test our theories by doing research. Now, one of the things that can be quite bewildering to the new sociology student is the sheer range of sociological theories on offer. So to make life easier, it's helpful if we can categorise sociological theories so that we can recognise the type of theory that we're looking at. And one way in which we can do this is by looking at the level of analysis that the theory engages with. So at one extreme, we've got what we call macro perspectives, okay, and their level of analysis is the big picture. So macro perspectives are theories that stand back and look at society as a whole. So macro perspectives offer us a panoramic view of how the different institutions in society fit together as a whole. At the opposite extreme, we've got what we call micro perspectives, and their level of analysis is the small picture. So rather than looking at society as a whole, a micro perspective starts by looking at individuals and their behaviour in small social groups. So the main focus of micro-sociology is on small-scale social interaction, and therefore micro-sociology shares a lot in common with social psychology. And then in between these two levels, we've got what Robert Murden called middle-range sociological theories. So these are more general than micro perspectives, but they're not as ambitious as macro perspectives. So middle-range theories might be interested in a particular institution within society, such as the education system or the media, rather than society as a whole. Another useful way of categorising sociological theories is to relate them to something called the structure-agency debate. Now, structural perspectives are those perspectives that argue that human behaviour is largely determined by the social system. So in structural perspectives, there's very little room for free choice. Individuals are largely the puppets of society, and therefore when looking at the relationship between society and the individual, a structural perspective will start by looking at society and then analysing how society influences the actions, the beliefs, the attitudes of individual people. In contrast, agency theories look at this relationship between the individual and society from the opposite perspective. So they start by looking at individuals, and they believe that individuals have more free will and are able to create society out of their everyday interactions. So this cartoon shows you the relationship between society and the individual from the point of view of a structural perspective. So structural perspectives, remember, are those theories that believe that the behaviour and the values of individual human beings are largely a result of wider social forces which are external to the individual. So from this perspective, individuals are the puppets of society. They are determined or moulded and shaped and constrained by the wider social forces that act upon them. So as we can see in this cartoon, from this perspective, the individual is like a puppet whose strings are being pulled by the social institutions that exist within society, such as the family, the education system, the mass media, the workplace, etc. In complete contrast, agency theories, sometimes called social action theories, reject the idea that people are simply the puppets of wider social forces, and in contrast, Agency theories emphasise the free will and choice of individuals and their role in creating the social structure. One final way of distinguishing between different theories in sociology is to work out whether or not they are a consensus theory or a conflict theory. And here, the key issue is about whether or not the theory believes that the organisation of society is set up to benefit everybody or in the interests of particular groups. So consensus theories are those perspectives that tend to be more positive about existing social arrangements, that tend to focus on the benefits of society for everybody. Conflict theories, in contrast, are those theories that are more radical and much more critical of existing social arrangements. So conflict theories start with the assumption that society is set up to benefit certain social groups at the expense of others. Okay, this map is an attempt to summarise some of the main theories that we're going to be looking at in year one. Now, I wouldn't worry about this too much at the moment. This will make a lot more sense once we start to look at some of the individual theories, but it's an attempt to summarise the main theories in sociology in terms of some of the debates that I've just outlined. But as I said, don't worry about this too much at the moment. As we start to look at individual theories, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you have to agree completely with one theory rather than another one. Okay? Theories are simply tools that we use to help us think about society. And society is so complex, it's never going to be the case that you're going to have one theory that explains everything. So no theory is absolutely right or wrong, and in fact I would argue that considering a range of different theories is beneficial because it allows us to build a fuller picture of social life. So in this introduction to social theory, I've tried to explain the importance of both theory and research, and also introduce you to some of the main ways in which we categorise sociological theories. And if some of this has seemed a bit abstract, okay, don't worry too much, because a lot of this is about laying the foundations for the more specific work that we'll start to do on individual theories in the next section. So we're going to be coming back to the themes of this particular screencast, but with much more specific examples in the next few presentations.